The superpower of every age lives in fear. They live in fear because even in times of tranquility, they have to worry about being challenged by a rising power. And the reason they have to worry about it is that when a superpower falls, it falls by violence. Throughout history, Thucydides tells us that Sparta, the strongest state of the Peloponnese, felt so threatened by the growing military strength and cultural dynamism of Athens that it chose war. Napoleon's France conquered all of Europe before it could be beaten back and the balance of power reestablished in Europe. Germany, 3 times, 2 times within 30 years, thrust Europe into cataclysm because the existing order could not accommodate Germany's ambitions. This is what hegemonic transitions look like. Scenes of battlefield carnage, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people killed. In fact, throughout all of history, there is only a single instance of a superpower giving way peacefully to a rising challenger, and that's Britain and the United States. What was it that made this transition unique in all of history and peaceful? What was it about one or both of these countries that made a transition possible between an existing hegemon and a rising challenger? What does that tell us for future hegemonic transitions? Historians mark the distinction, the moment of hegemonic transition between Britain and the United States in different places. Some mark it when the American economy recovers from the Civil War and comes roaring into global prominence in the 1870s. Some mark it with the Spanish-American War in 1898, the debutante ball of American military power. Some mark it at World War I, when American money and American soldiers were essential to breaking the stalemate on the Western Front. Some mark it with the Versailles negotiations, where the United States envisioned a different kind of victor's peace. Some mark it from 1945, where the victorious United States imposed that peace on allies and adversaries alike. I think the point of inflection is in 1895, during a crisis now obscure in history over the boundaries of Venezuela. We tend to think of Britain and the United States as so similar because we speak a common language, we come from the European Enlightenment, we have parallel political traditions of representative governance and religious tolerance. Similarity is not what Britain and the United States looked like when this transition begins. Britain had an empire on which the sun never set. It produced 25% of global GDP. It sustained a navy twice as strong as the next challenger by policy. Britain viewed Americans as people too extreme in their politics and religion to live in peace anywhere else. Our great pride in the creed that all men are created equal looked ludicrously hypocritical when slavery existed in America, and even long after that. Charles Dickens describes American culture as more barbarous than the Indian civilizations it conquers. And when the Founding Fathers generation transitions to the rough-hewn men of the frontier, Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, the United States looks even more alarming to Britain than it had previously. And the 1880s and 1890s were a tumultuous time in American politics. The American economy had, with the closing of the American West, Americans began worrying whether the economy could provide enough jobs for everyone. And that translated into tumultuous politics. In 1887, President Grover Cleveland devoted his entire State of the Union address to talking about the importance of opening the American economy to the world, that our industries were strong enough to bear the competition, that wages could be sustained even if we opened to the world. It was an economic tour de force and a political disaster. His party, the Democrats, lost both houses of Congress, and he was voted out of office as president. Republicans, under Benjamin Harrison, proceeded to institute tariffs as high as 50% across some industries, with the predictable economic devastation. And 2 years later, the midterm election of 1890, Republicans lost 50% of their seats in the House. Benjamin Harrison gets voted out of office, and Grover Cleveland comes back in 1892, the only American president to serve non-consecutive terms in office. Cleveland was no imperialist. He opposed the annexation of Hawaii that his predecessor had put into place. He believed that the Monroe Doctrine, which said that the United States would oppose efforts by any power to create colonies in the Western Hemisphere. It had been settled American policy for 70 years, and Grover Cleveland called it a troublesome doctrine. So it's deeply ironic that Grover Cleveland becomes the first American president to enforce the Monroe Doctrine, and he does it against Great Britain. Britain and Venezuela had been disputing where the boundary line fell between Britain's territory of Guyana and Venezuela. They'd been disputing that for over 50 years. But in 1893, the government of Venezuela appealed to the United States for protection from Britain, invoking the Monroe Doctrine. Cleveland initially took a mild position, recommending arbitration. Britain responded by landing Marines in the Venezuelan port of Corinto and seizing the country. They repudiated the Monroe Doctrine, saying that it had no legal standing, and that, moreover, Britain too was sovereign as an American power and controlled more territory than the United States did in North America. As you can see from this cartoon, that's Grover Cleveland twisting the tail of the great British lion, and all of the monarchs of Europe laughing at Britain. So Grover Cleveland, confronted with British seizure of Venezuela, goes to the American Congress and asks for their support to go to war with Great Britain if Great Britain will not agree to arbitration over Venezuela. He gives a speech in which he says, "The United States, because we alone are a democracy in the world, we are a law unto ourselves. And must protect ourselves from depredation like this." The resolution passes both houses of Congress without a single opposing vote. Teddy Roosevelt starts talking about the importance of jingo speeches and war with Britain. American generals determined that they can invade Canada with 10 days preparation. And the British military agrees that it's hopeless to defend Canada against the United States. So why doesn't war happen? This is your classic setup for a hegemonic war. It doesn't happen because the people of the United States and Great Britain intervene. American newspapers appeal to the British to write letters in support of peace, and thousands of people do, including the Prince of Wales, the husband of Queen Victoria. 354 members of the British Parliament appeal to their American legislative counterparts to have any dispute between the two countries solved peacefully. So what begins as a potential conflict, as a potential war between Britain and the United States, ends up with them as allies. These are members of the British government feeding the vulture of American expansionism. And what makes this peaceful is because the people of both countries come to see themselves as so similar that war between them would be fratricide. What does this mean for a rising China? What does this mean for a rising China? China's rise has been genuinely astronomical. Hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty since 1978, when the government turned towards capitalism. And China's rise, though, is an authoritarian capitalism. The government is betting that the people of China, as long as they continue to grow wealthy, won't care about political liberty. President Xi's Chinese dream is the tight political control of the Communist Party, increasing prosperity, and the respect of the world. And whether China can achieve this is an open question. There are a lot of challenges that stand in the way of China becoming a superpower. Whether, for example, they can navigate the middle income trap that many developing economies get mired down in as they try and transition from manufacturing to higher value exports. Whether the kinds of people who produce those exports will continue to permit themselves not to be protected with individual rights and liberties from their government. Whether China can grow wealthy before they grow old, with the demographic consequences of the one-child policy. Whether their aggressiveness towards their neighbors will keep those neighbors continued tied in tight alliance with the United States. I myself am skeptical that China can continue to rise and become a superpower, a peer and a competitor of the United States. But what we learn from the transition from British to American hegemony is that what is crucial in making for a peaceful transition is a sense of commonality between publics. It's more important than government policy. It's more important than what people think their national interests are. That if they believe that there is a sense of commonality, that creates the political space for compromises on national interests and compromises on government policy. So really, the central question of war and peace in our current age is whether a rising China and a superpower United States can find a sense of commonality between their two peoples, because that's the most important thing in making for safe passage between a rising power and an established superpower. Thank you.